Welcome to Grow Money Business, the podcast dedicated to helping business owners grow both their wealth and business on their own terms. Here's your host, Grant Bledsoe.
Hello, everybody. Grant Bledsoe here. Welcome back to Grow Money Business. This week on the show, my guest is Bunny Young. Bunny is a business consultant and former therapist and joins us on the show today to talk about burnout and PTSD. We've now been dealing with the pandemic for a full 2 years, and there are a lot of people around the world that have dealt with a lot of burnout over that time period. Just thinking about all the stuff that we've had to deal with over the last couple of years makes my head spin. And Bunny joins us on the show to provide a framework for maintaining mental health and a few tips for avoiding burnout, whatever that means to you personally. Bunny's had quite the career. She's a very eclectic person on top of that. She's a third-generation entrepreneur. She's started, grown, sold numerous businesses throughout her career, and in fact got her start in the business world as a stunt woman on a show over in China. She joins us on the show today to talk about all this stuff. And we had a lovely conversation, and I think there's a lot to take away from with regard to burnout and PTSD and mental health, regardless of where you're at personally. I hope you enjoy it. Hey, everybody. Real quick before we jump into today's episode, I have been advised by my attorneys to remind you all that none of what you might hear in today or any other episode of Grow Money Business is financial, investing, tax, legal, fitness, or even relationship advice. It's content that you're free to use and deploy on your own terms. And before you take any actions on what we might cover in the show, I really encourage you to consult with your accountant, attorney, or financial planner. If you don't have a financial planner and think that you might need one, be sure to check out threeoakswealth.com to learn more about my firm's planning, advice, and investment services. Alrighty, I'm here with Bunny Young this week on the podcast. Bunny, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I am glad that you're here too. You have kind of an eclectic career. You've done a lot of stuff. And one thing I really wanted to talk about with you today was the mental health for business owners and burnout. We've been dealing with the pandemic here for about 2 years. A lot of businesses, a lot of business owners have just had to jump through a lot of unique hurdles, shall we call it, over the last couple of years. In my business, it's been pretty stressful dealing with all these stimulus things and helping people through that and the market-related stuff. How do you deal with feelings of burnout? When you're feeling burned out, what do you do? How do you manage it?
Yeah, I'd love to say that there was like a magic pill. Well, first off, I want to go back to the eclectic background because I wanted to throw it out there and say, isn't it good to have a diversified portfolio, Grant? Like, isn't that important?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
That's just what I have in my background is a diversified portfolio. And with burnout, there's big burnout and there's little burnout. And so we get these micro experiences throughout the day and we typically mitigate them with coffee or some kind of we ignore it. And so those are the ones that I like to address the most is because big burnout, the real solution that can't be avoided is a hard reset. And that's the thing that people don't want to hear. But it's like, look, think about it with retirement. You can invest $100 a week since you're 20 and end up being able to have this money to retire, hopefully, at the end of your career. Or you can just live your entire life, not invest a single cent, and then hope at the end you're going to somehow magically be able to have enough to retire. And that's the same thing with burnout is we push ourselves and we hustle and we grind, especially in the Western culture. And then we hope we're going to have enough for retirement. And it just doesn't happen. And so we have to choose a different kind of lifestyle. And burnout comes internally and externally. Anybody who has been through either the ups or the lows of the pandemic in the past 2 years is experiencing post-traumatic stress or symptoms similar to post-traumatic stress. Coming from the therapy world, that's exactly what we would call it, is we were experienced to a traumatic event. Granted, most people are familiar with one specific quick traumatic event causing post-traumatic stress, but what we're seeing is little micro stress over an extended period of time. And so we're all doing some healing right now. And what is it that you need? That's a very personal question. I have clients that, for me, I would love to just go sit on the beach for a couple weeks in the Caribbean, and that would be restorative for me. And I have clients that are like, I don't like sand. And so, what is your burnout medicine? And making a list of maybe 10 things that are the big things, and then 10 things that you can do on a daily basis to make those deposits and make sure that you're not going to run into baby burnout or big burnout.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely makes sense to me that it's unique to the individual. Can we circle back to something you said just a minute ago, and that's post-traumatic stress disorder? And typically we think of that as something acute, one time quickly happens that's so disruptive that we have PTSD from it later. But this has been kind of like a slow drip over the last couple of years, and you're saying that clinically, it's definitely a post-traumatic stress disorder type event. How do you define what are the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and how do you think about that?
So there's a ton of different signs and symptoms that you can look up in the DSM-5. That if you're
What's
that
the
curious,
DSM-5 for our?
Diagnostic Statistic Manual, fifth
Okay.
edition. And to tell you, I won't tell you what edition I started with as a therapist, so it won't give away how long I've been doing this and how old I am. Um, and what the examples that would probably be most relevant and helpful to your listeners are when you experience a elevated heart rate logging into your bank account and logging into any kind of your financial institution, or looking at the stock market, seeing somebody wearing a mask, seeing the numbers of COVID cases rising. And then there's also the social stress that we've gone through of feeling discriminated against. And so there's a lot of indication that it's not just COVID from the past 2 years. It's being told where you can and cannot go, being told, a lot of people being judged regarding vaccination decisions. And so it's almost like this, we were kind of, this is like a really bad analogy, but we were kind of just lemmings, like on this industrial line, living our lives, going to work, driving, having our time to decompress. And then we were all locked up, either one of two things. We were all locked up in our homes, or we all had to go put our lives on the line just to go to work, like as a nurse or a police officer. And either of those situations was really traumatic. And then to watch an even more divisive world, people that didn't have access to internet, children that didn't have access to, computers in order to do virtual school, that are falling behind in school. And as a parent, the guilt of, having to figure out whether you're going to go to work or you're going to stay home with your kid because your kid doesn't have school and you don't have childcare. So those are a lot of the things that can keep you up at night. So with post-traumatic stress, you can also have night terrors. But it's basically being re-exposed to a similar event and remembering what that event felt like, and having the signs and symptoms like, I'm going to say prematurely, like the event hasn't happened, but you're anticipating the event happening. So your brain is already in the state of mind of, we're going to go back into a pandemic world. And, that may or may not be the truth. However, your brain remembers what it felt like looking at your bank account when you had to quit your job or lost your job, and watch the bank account slowly go down.
I see. I see. Okay, so you've been you've experienced these external stressors from a variety of angles, and
Mhm.
at that point your brain has been kind of conditioned to expect those bad things happening. So you're kind of living in fear of the next shoe dropping, which has you defensive all the way
Yeah.
around, right?
Yeah, the most common description of post-traumatic stress is somebody that's been experienced, a veteran, a war veteran that has experienced gunfire day after day, and they come home and
Mhm.
they hear a car backfire and they have a reaction as if it's gunfire. So that is one of the most common textbooks examples of post-traumatic stress. And so what we have right now is, we've been experienced, instead of gunfire, over and over to panic, to fear, to uncertainty. And now, anytime there's something that we're perceiving as could be uncertain, and this is not true for 100% of the population. However, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, this is making sense, this could be true for you.
So how does this compare to burnout then? Is PTSD technically burnout, or are they two separate things?
So, burnout is not something that would be in the DSM 5. It's not, we don't diagnose an individual with burnout. Post traumatic stress is a disorder that would be in the DSM 5 that we would, diagnose. Most individuals that we're in the therapy world. And even though I'm retired from practicing in that, I'm working with organizations and helping organizations and teams, with burnout, is like a generalized anxiety disorder. And
Hmm.
so, that's something that is diagnosable. Burnout is something that's experienced, but we're not diagnosing burnout. The signs and symptoms of burnout, detachment, loss of interest, those can all go into the diagnostic statistic manual. And I'm talking to, Grant about burnout. If I was talking to another therapist about a patient, we would be talking about the actual you know, um, disorders. So whether you want to call it generalized anxiety disorder, post traumatic stress, burnout, whatever you want to call it, what you're experiencing and how you choose to heal in that journey. That's really the positive side of this, and the awareness that this is the majority of the world that is going through a mental health crisis right now. And so the stigma that was put around mental health, especially in the workplace, of, taking a mental health day and having that be like kind of frowned upon, there's a good argument for taking multiple mental health days to recover around this. And even the uncertainty of, are we going back to our offices or not? And, you could even see people that get invited to a Zoom meeting and are experiencing burnout around Zoom meetings. They don't want to have one more virtual meeting. And FaceTiming, it's the amount of people I see FaceTiming that are not actually looking at the screen post, I'm going to say, in 2022 versus in 2019, because we're tired of screens. And
Hmm.
so I could tell you that there's no difference. And what I want to say is that the biggest difference is the choice that you make in the path to healing. If you are experiencing severe post traumatic stress symptoms, by all means, have a professional and, intervene. If you're experiencing burnout, you may elect to get a professional involved as well. And so the companies that we're working with a Better Place Consulting, are taking a proactive approach in calling things burnout again. And I'm in full transparency, recognizing the stigma around mental health. And so if we were calling them post traumatic stress support groups, I don't know how many people would actually electively attend.
Right.
But having a burnout prevention course or burnout awareness support workshop, those kinds of things are something that companies can provide without having to put a diagnosis on their team.
Yeah. Well, maybe you can offer like free coffee and donuts too, which may make it a more attractive place to be. So that decision, and you just highlighted it a second time, of how you have small burnout and you have big burnout, and how do you manage that? And in Western culture, we have a tendency to neglect small burnout because we charge forward and work 6 days a week, whereas in Europe, they often take 8 or 10 weeks off for the summer, and there's a little bit more work-life balance. That decision seems like it's the nexus of the whole thing, right? Right. When you're in the moment and you're feeling outside stressors, how do you manage that to where it doesn't snowball into a big burnout situation?
Well,
Seems
well,
like that's of paramount importance. No.
so first, what's been highlighted is like European culture of taking holidays versus taking vacations. And that puts a lot of the ownership on the company. And
Hmm.
so as an employee, you can choose to work for a company that has holidays or that, and there's people that are probably going to respond to this podcast and say, yes, Bunny, but I have to make a paycheck. At what cost? So 2 weeks a year is not going to reset your mental health, is not going to give you, and out of those 2 weeks, how many times are you going to check your email? I have one of my really good friends who's worked for companies from American Express to like gigantic corporate companies and is now working for a company where she's allowed to work from anywhere in the world, but they bought her an iWatch because she experiences stress. She loves surfing, but experiences stress about and guilt about going surfing because she can't take her cell phone with her. And so she can't check her emails. So they got her an iWatch so that she could at least be in communication while she was surfing. That company culture, even though that's like you're paying attention to your people, that company culture is something that is top down. And so, when you're on vacation, like I have an autoresponder, people laugh. I have an autoresponder year round because people treat email like text messaging.
Yeah, I do.
And it's like 300 emails in a day. No one is that important, And so being able to really set the boundaries where 4 o'clock, I'm done. We're not getting the productivity grant. Like we don't get the productivity. Less than out of a 40-hour work week, less than 20% studies have shown at this point in 2022, less than 20% of our work week is actually productive. Therefore, one could make the argument that I could go to work for 20% of the week and get paid the same salary. The rest of the time, I'm just a butt in a seat taking up electricity and resources. And so there's a lot of finger pointing at the companies, but who goes to work for the companies? We, as an American society, determine what the pulse of our company cultures are going to be because we are the workforce. And this is where you're seeing the great resignation, as people are calling it, because it's like, we can't change the company, so we're just going to not work for the company anymore. And now companies are changing. And we're seeing giant financial institutions saying, you can make your schedule. We're switching more to the 40-hour work week was invented by Henry Ford, to my knowledge. Somebody can write in to this podcast and let me know that that's incorrect knowledge. However, I've been saying it for so long that at this point, I'm pretty sure I'm just the one being cited as the source when you go ahead and Google it.
You just repeat it enough and it becomes true, right?
Apparently, there's a
But
Wikipedia
I
page
believe
about
you.
it. So he invented the 40-hour work week, and then we catered schools around, that kind of industrial age of having kids going to school for a certain period of time so that parents could go to work. And then actually we have summers off because that's when the kids would have to go and tend to the farms and actually do all the harvests. And so like the patterns that we're running, Grant, are centuries old and they're not working. They're not actually working. Think about it. We've had a 40-hour work week for however long. And now instead of phones and fax machines and all of that, we have instantaneous communication and Slack and email. Why hasn't our work week shortened? Like, it doesn't take as long to do what we used to do. So now we just do more in that 40 hours instead of getting the same amount of work done in a shorter period of time. Like we've made our lives, quote unquote, easier and more connected. And yet we don't disconnect. We just connect more. We just keep moving the needle. And so I guess, that's not an answer to your question, but to those that are listening, this is your life. And time is a resource that is the most valuable and precious resource that we have. And if you're trading time for dollars, it's one of the reasons that, this is a plug for you, but it's one of the reasons that I got into investment is I made a vow to myself is that my money would always work harder than I did because I'm not in a situation with a heart condition to trade time for money, until I die. And that wasn't sustainable. And it wasn't a life that I wanted to really model for my children. I wanted to be able to be paid for my value, not for my time. And so that's something that I've worked really hard on doing. And that's really a personal thing, that to sit down and be like, I'm tired of this 40-hour work week and I'm burnt out on this 40-hour work week. And what am I going to do about it?
That's that. I want to hear more about how you made that story, because I agree with you that it's the 40-hour work week is unnecessary in a lot of contexts, in industry in the U.S. and around the world these days. But if you're a business owner who's trying to make payroll, you often don't have the luxury of confining your work week to 15 or 20 or 25 hours in the formative early years of getting the thing off the ground. So how do you set those boundaries when you do have financial obligations that you have to meet before the machine is running on its own, or you have enough staff to delegate things to where you can truly structure your own week and your employees' weeks, hopefully around a sub 40-hour work week? How does it work in the build-up phase?
Well,
And how
in
did you
the
do it specifically?
how did I do it? Um, yeah, I don't recommend people doing it the way I did it. I also have the benefit of being a third generation entrepreneur. And so I had this awareness one day after, getting my master's degree in counseling and psychology. And I swore the only thing I would ever not be is an entrepreneur. And I did social services for a long time and ran into the same time constraints of my caseload. You talk about 40 hours would have been a vacation. I had like 84 to 87 kids on my caseload that I'm supposed to spend an hour with every single week. And there's sometimes 2 hours between, houses, like drive time. So when I switched to private practice, I had a 6-figure private practice within a couple months, and realized that, my friends that I'd gone to school with were like, how did you do that? And it's like, I realized that it was second nature to me to do business because I'd grown up in business. But what I went to school for was to be a therapist. They didn't teach us how to start a business or start a company. So there's one thing is like, my daughter, I was working with my 10-year-old on lunar cycles and all this kind of stuff. And I was thinking to myself, like, how is this actually going to apply when you go out into the world? Like, unless you're going to be, doing something with lunar cycles for NASA, or I don't know, like, what does it matter what you're learning as far as that goes? And so she's had the benefit of now being a fourth generation, growing up as the fourth generation in an entrepreneurial family. And so, to directly answer your question, there's a couple ways to do it. There's a million ways to do it, but there's a couple ways that come to mind. If you don't want to have the workload completely on you and you don't have the capital to bring in the team, then you take on an investor. So that's somebody who's farther down the line and has resources that you don't have, either money or a team or something along those lines. And you bring on that individual in order to reduce your learning curve. The other thing is that all of your activities are not optimized, and, get a mentor and learn from that mentor how they wasted time. And so again, reduce your learning curve. You can make money from day one on opening your business for most companies, with the exception of being a nurse on the floor of a hospital or a police officer that, has a certain amount of patrol time they have to put in. In an entrepreneurial setting, it really just depends on how much risk you're willing to put in and how much reward you want out of that. And so if you want less of the risk and you're taking on investors and reducing your learning curve, you're going to have less of the reward. And you also, have the benefit of being able to take on mentors. And so in the financial planning world, if you can have less of the risk and join a firm that has a book of clients per se already, and so you have less of the risk, but also maybe less of the reward on then taking, hanging up your own sign, and you're starting with a 0 book of clients, but maybe you talk to seasoned financial advisors and financial planners and be able to say, how did you do it? And they share with you their networking tips. So there's a thing in entrepreneurship and in life that I talk about, which is called relationship currency. So before you make a single dollar in your business, you have to make a relationship. And with a client, with a community, you have to build trust. And so, focusing on how much time am I going to spend building this, let's take it social media, for instance. People will curate their Instagram profile and, their feed. That's a long burn to build trust in order to sell. If I'm selling journals or coffee cups, it makes more sense for me to go to maybe the local restaurant and say, who do you buy your coffee cups from? And then if they're not willing to buy my coffee cups, then go to who they buy their coffee cups from and say, I'm not looking to be your competition, but I'm looking to provide the best coffee cup to this community. What are your recommendations? And that direct, authentic communication is really what has gotten me so far in my business. And people are like, I also have clients that don't want to work a 10-hour work week, a 4-hour work week. And they love being able to put in the work, and they love being able to provide the services themselves. And so is it possible in virtually every company? It's possible to be more productive and be more efficient. And in every situation, it is possible to be more mentally healthy, to have more mental health in whatever you're doing. Because when you leave the office, most of us don't shut off our minds and don't leave work at work. And that's one of the things that the pandemic has really imposed upon, is that people were working in environments that used to be sacred: kitchen tables, living rooms, bedrooms. And those were not associated with work. And now, if they're still working from home, basically is one of the recommendations that we have for teams that are continuing to do a hybrid kind of work style, is to set up a dedicated workspace. Same thing with kids that are learning, is to have a dedicated learning space. Because otherwise, even though you're not consciously thinking about it, your conscious is only 5% of your body. The other 95% is subconscious and unconscious. And so your body is running these programs in these environments without you knowing it. And before you know it, you're completely exhausted and you have no
Yeah.
idea why.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, you mentioned a couple of outlets. If you're feeling financial obligation, maybe you don't want to take as much risk. Use the analogy of, you join an established financial planning firm instead of hanging your own shingle, or you take on investors, or some combination of the two. Those are big, heavy decisions. And in my own experience, when I've faced burnout in my career, it's really hard to think through those issues with clarity when you're in the moment, dealing with all of the symptoms of the burnout itself. What tips do you have to kind of remove yourself and make a good, solid, sound, logical, objective decision when it comes to, do I take on investors or do I go it on my own? Because that's a career-changing decision in and of itself right there.
Build your own board of advisors, and as if you have a Fortune 50 company. So build your own. It goes back to relationship currency. And also, my financial team. Even when I had nothing, I still had a financial team of advisors to be able to say, like, if this is going to be a $11 million company, does it make more sense to sell my car right now for $10K, or to give 50% of my company away for $10K? And how much do I really want this? And what am I really willing to put at risk here? And so you're not supposed to have all of the answers. And it's not when you're at risk of burnout, it's right now. Like, start practicing being able to ask for support and ask for help, because my grandfather used to always say that it's lonely at the top. And it was a joke about, owning your own company because, everything's on your shoulders. But at the same time, if you don't ask for help is when it's lonely, in my experience, and I have redefined success in monetary terms and in other terms so many times in my life that I just realized that it's going to be this thing that's going to be evolving. Success today might be different than when my children have children. And so I'm okay with that relationship. But my grandfather also said that the CEO should be the dumbest person in the room. And so I've done a really good job of surrounding myself with people who are willing to share with me not just their knowledge, which is absolutely precious, but their experiences and their network, which is incredibly valuable. If you asked me for certain ones of my relationships, would I rather have $1 million from them or introductions with their network and trust from them? It's going to be trust and introductions because I can make $100 million with those. But, that people get so uncomfortable with putting themselves out there and feeling like they're going to be either a burden to somebody or that they might fail. And failure is just simply a lesson. And it's only it can be a very expensive lesson. I've had businesses that have failed and tanked and burned. And that makes me actually more valuable as a business owner and especially as a business coach and consultant, because then I can bring those lessons. So it really it adds value. So the short answer to your question is, how do you take a step back? Is keep surrounding yourself with people who know what your vision is and that can hold your vision for you and remind you when you are not being true to that vision or sacrificing your own values.
That's that's very well put. We see that a lot in working with our clients here in the financial planning firm is when we lay out a financial plan, and any good financial professional worth their salt should be able to help you align what's important to you with your resources. And having some trajectory on what that looks like for you and your family really is invaluable when you face some kind of exogenous stress.
Mm-hmm.
Revenues go to zero because you run a restaurant and now we have a pandemic and so you can't put people in the restaurant. Let's go back to the financial plan and lay out what's important to us and come up with an emergency strategy. All of what you're saying, I absolutely agree with. I'm also really curious what kind of businesses your grandfather ran, and was it your mom? You said you were third generation, so it was your mom or your dad or both who
Both.
both. So tell us about
Yes.
that.
So my grandfather started a restaurant and went bankrupt, and then took, I think it was $20,000 as a loan from his brother-in-law and started a trucking company. And the joke is that he knew less about trucking than he did about restaurant ownership. And yet it's still going. I think it was started, I think, I want to say 1969, but it might be 1975. I would have to check with my cousins on that. But being able to, he built it on relationships. And my dad was in the Army, and my dad got out of the Army and was working for an individual who had a garage door company, like we have on our houses. And my dad was ambitious enough to say, I would like to expand this and open a second location, essentially franchise this into another location. Can I buy, or pay you for a portion of this? So he took his mentorship, his knowledge, and his hard work, and he opened another location. And then he ended up buying the entire business and selling another location to somebody else. And my mom helped in my grandfather's trucking company, and then she worked in a tow truck company and had a variety of different support staff jobs, but she was able to come into my dad's company. And I tell people that my dad ended up working for my mom because she could just see the business. My dad, he's the hardest working man on the face of this planet. However, you talk about taking a step back. She could see the machine and the operations and how to make it efficient, and the finances and the invoicing, accounts receivable and accounts payable, profit and loss, and, profit margins. And she brought in an admin assistant and just like all of this stuff. Like, she really just is a genius kind of when it comes to those actual businesses. And one of the things that I noticed was my dad still, and other individuals that they hired still had to show up and do something in order for them to make money. Whereas I was like, it would be great to sell Grant a garage door maintenance program where once a year, we'll come and do preventative maintenance on your garage door, but you're paying annually. So I have predictive revenue
Mm-hmm.
versus having revenue that's dependent on a monthly somebody's garage door breaking or them wanting to replace their garage door, or making a deal with being the sole provider for somebody who's building housing communities. And so those were the kinds of things that drove me, was like, how can we make it even more stable? And so when I got into therapy, I did a lot of those things. And then I know we were going to talk about the things that I did before I was a therapist, but being able to learn the value of a team, I ended up in a situation that was a team came out to do a retreat. We do equine retreats, professional development equine retreats. And they said, we want somebody who's been through the retreat experience with us to support us back at our headquarters. And my mentor was like, I can't do that. So you're going to have to go do that. And I was like, I'm a therapist. Like, I'm not a business consultant. And my mentor was like, can you hold a safe space for transformation? And I said, yeah. And so that's what we ended up doing with creating A Better Place Consulting, was that work can look and feel different. And if we can take care of the humans within the workplace, then the process, the product, the clients, the revenue is all going to grow if we focus on growing the humans. So those are the kinds of businesses that they had. And then once I reached a certain point in A Better Place Consulting, decided I was seeing predatory lending and decided that I would help with predatory lending for small business owners, mainly family-centric business owners that had 27% interest. And so I ended up buying their debt or loaning them a certain amount of money to pay off their debt, and give them a lower interest rate and give them business coaching. And in exchange for that, not only did I get the money and the interest, but I also got the revenue from the business coaching. And that was where I was like, it feels, when you talk about a portfolio, that's where it started, was sitting down and like, what do you want to invest in, or what's your, retirement goal and all of that. Now the question of what do I want to invest in for me personally is more of, what difference do I want to make? And so and I don't recommend this for anybody that doesn't have an extremely high risk tolerance, but picking people to invest in and investing in their company and investing in their growth, which again has the highest risk, but for me, it's the highest reward on a variety of different ways. And that's how I end up being able to lay my head down at night and sleep peacefully, is because I know that I've not just made an income, I've made an impact.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wonderful to be able to align all those things. I would suggest for most of us, we do need to build our core portfolio with more traditional stocks and bonds first. But I agree with everything that you're saying. What was
I do have whole life insurance, just so we know.
okay? We'll save that for another podcast. Let's not talk about that right now. Was that transition your foray into entrepreneurship, or were you running your own practice and private practice before that point?
You would have to ask my mom the answer to that question, because the answer to the question is yes, I was running my own private practice. However, when I was 17, and getting my undergraduate, I started teaching swimming lessons. And since I was going to school and I had 2 other jobs, I started charging like $15 for a swimming lesson and paying somebody $10 to teach it. And I would keep the $5. And it got to a point where, like I'm 17 and so I can't really have my own company. And so my mom was helping me, and my mom was like, you do know this means you own your own company and you're an entrepreneur, right? And I was like, no, this is just the thing I'm doing to make money. And I had that for a couple of years. I ended up with like, oh my gosh, I think it was like 72 people. And I ended up being able to kind of sell that to another swimming and lifeguarding company and like walk away with like my first taste of, oh my gosh, like that just happened. And to me, it was, I was laughing with my mom because I was like, no, I'm not, this is not a company. Like I'm just charging them more and having somebody else do it who's willing to do it for less. Like that's all this is, it's simple economics. And so her answer would be that I started my own company, like right out of the gate. Like it didn't even take me months coming out of high school. And she would probably even tell you that I was making money before that. I remember selling Pokemon cards. Like I mean, it was always like kids would wait for their allowances, and I wanted, I didn't want a cap on my allowance. And so I wanted to be able to do what I wanted to do. And so I found things that I was good at and able to, our high school, this is probably my first entrepreneurial venture, is our high school. You could pay for parking or you could park on the street, which was parallel parking. And I owned an F-150 long bed, and I would get there early and park. And then people would give me 10, 15, 20 bucks to parallel park their cars, because they never learned how to parallel park in Southern California. They never learned how to parallel park. And so I'd walk away with like 100, 150 bucks before school started, and then I'd go to school, and this is where I'm going to get like a call from the IRS on all these back taxes that I owe. Like I promise it never went over $3,000 or whatever it is a year. But, I got a new surfboard and was just like, you can use your value and save people time and energy and reduce their learning curve. If they don't, I would have charged to teach people how to parallel park, but they didn't care to learn. They just didn't want to pay for the parking at our high school. And so they would just pay me. And I even got like smoothies some mornings. People would pay me with like, surf wax. So yeah, I guess I was always kind of an entrepreneurial mind.
You mentioned at the beginning of the show that you were kind of a reluctant entrepreneur, that you were third generation, did everything that you could not to engage in that. What I'm getting from you now is that you were engaged from day one. There was no where was the reluctance?
I didn't want the risk. I mean, I saw the risk of my grandfather having the burden of supporting, and I went through this with the pandemic. I mean, I didn't take a paycheck for 2 years, because of not just from the pandemic, but we had a business failure. And so I didn't take a paycheck. We had a car accident, a business failure, and then the pandemic. And so, it's actually probably been longer since I've actually taken a traditional, W-2 paycheck from the company, because I have individuals on my teams whose families depend on us being able to do what we do and do it well. And that is that's the stuff that keeps me up at night. If all of my businesses burned to the ground, they're now virtual. I had one brick and mortar business, and I won't do that again. But, if all of them, I had to shut them down today, I wouldn't lose any sleep, because I could start a company tomorrow. Nobody can take the skills and experiences away from me. Well, the car accident and getting a concussion definitely took that away, some of it. But my team, Grant, is really in that this is why we do what we do. I want to take care of the people in the company and make sure that they know that tomorrow they're going to be able to provide for their families, so that they have that reduced amount of stress. That's why it's so important to me that the individuals on our team have the freedom to use their gifts the way that they want to, and are not restricted simply by job description, which is like a whole nother, podcast that we could do about how I approach what we do and how I support people. But that was when we talk about risk. That was why I did not want to be an entrepreneur. I wanted somebody to just write me a check every 2 weeks for the rest of my life. That sounded like a good enough thing for me. And to me, there was no risk in parking people's cars. If I think about it now, it's like if I had wasn't great at parking, I could have like gotten, dinged somebody's. I mean, I went to a really nice high school. I was driving my used F-150, but I was parking Mercedes, Porsches, like Lexus. And if I had hit somebody, it would have been a huge issue. But at the same time, those are not the things that I was thinking about at that time. Now, I'm thinking about I should have had general liability insurance. And I don't even know what that insurance would look like as far as car insurance goes. So the reluctance was about the responsibility for somebody else's family being able to eat.
Well, it's wisdom, having seen your parents and grandparents go through it, that gives you that perspective. A lot of business owners get into it without appreciating that risk, and it is certainly always there. You skipped over one thing very important about your background, though. I want to hear about your stunt woman days. Weren't you a stunt woman at one point?
I was a stunt woman, and you talk about risk. This is something that people are like, it has nothing to
Yeah.
do with what you do now. And I'm like, no, I would argue that it has everything to do with what I do now. So,
I need to
uh,
interrupt just for a quick moment. You grew up doing these entrepreneurial things, decided at some point that this is too much risk for me, I can't take it. So instead I'm going to go be a stunt woman. Am I characterizing that right?
so I met a really hot dude who is a stuntman. We met at a movie studio, and he's not only hot, but he's really one of a kind. And the way that he cares about people reminds me a lot of my grandfather. And he is an exceptionally talented stuntman. And he got a contract to go work in China. And he said, "Can I bring my girlfriend?" And they said, no, you can only bring her if you get married. And so he's basically like, all right, you want to get married? And back to your entrepreneurial spirit, I was like, I'm not going to go to China and just like sit around and do nothing. So I called the company and was like, will you give me a job? And they were like, sure. And so while living in China, I was a stunt woman. I was the seamstress on the set. And then, believe it or not, our stunt set didn't have an EMT. And since I had done 6 months of EMT training while I was in college, I was also the set's EMT, which came in very handy for a lot of different reasons. But that's how I ended up doing it. Was the reward was that I got to be able to be with this amazing human. And the risk was I got to go be a stunt woman. And so, but it was great. I learned so much about the value of a team and the importance of being able to trust your team. And um, I did, if you want to Google it, it's called an Australian rappel and Aussie rappel, which is a face first rappel. And it's not something that you want to do without A, knowing what you're doing, and B, making sure that you've triple checked your knots and your equipment. And so I would tie my knots, and then I'd have somebody else inspect my knots, and then I would check them before the show and right before I did my actual stunt. And we had another stunt woman that did the exact same stunt and went down too fast and broke both of her wrists and her face. And so, I learned about the value of taking your time, like also there's something to be said about the show that the audience sees, right? And so let's go back to business of like my coffee cup business, which I don't have. However, I do have a client who makes coffee cups if you want a good coffee cup. It's the show is 25 minutes. The audience is there for about 40 minutes with pre-show and all of that kind of stuff. And we put in months, and set builders put in even more in order to make that 25-minute show or 40-minute show, however you want to put it, actually come to life. And so even though you're holding a coffee cup in your hand, the accounting team, the legal team, the production team, the factory, the shipping, the logistics, all of it that goes into business. As a stunt woman, I really got a chance to appreciate everything that went into what the audience, what our clients, what our consumers ended up seeing and what they needed to see versus what we could accomplish behind the scenes to make it even more efficient. And also the work of just taking care of your body. And you talk about being a stunt professional. I mean, I wasn't getting any younger. And so, a stunt professional, you've got to make a certain amount of money in a certain amount of time because one accident, you've also got to have insurance. And this is where, I learned about diversification. You talked about restaurant owners in during the pandemic. And it's like, if I am making a profit from owning a restaurant, as a business owner now, with my wisdom and experience, I would look at buying the real estate for the restaurant to be able to lower, my monthly. Obviously, I'll go from rent to a mortgage, but I'll have an asset. And so then during the pandemic, at least I have an asset, and maybe I can rent out a portion of that and create, another revenue stream. And so within this one stunt show, it's not just, I didn't just do one stunt. I diversified my stunts. And the more I learned about, motorcycle, I could ride a motorcycle, driving. I didn't do driving stunts, but fire burns, the more valuable I became. And so as a business owner, it's like I have the knowledge of this business and I have the value. And so now I can take literally the business that I built, and then I can sell the knowledge that I learned building this business, and then I can put that in courses and then books, and I don't even have to be there, and that makes revenue. And then I can take all of, that revenue and just invest it in somebody else's business, and I don't even have to start the business, and that revenue will make money.
What was the show? What was it? What was the
like it was called like Guns, Money, and it doesn't even, I would have to translate it from Chinese. But it was really funny because it was my first year of marriage. And this is the part that the listeners will, hopefully you guys get a huge crack out of, is that it was my first year of marriage, and it was a Bonnie and Clyde show, and like a Brad Pitt police officer character, detective, was chasing us. I was cast as Bonnie. Another man was cast as Clyde. My husband was cast as the police officer. So for my first year of marriage, I spent 4 or 5 times a day, like shooting at my husband, blowing him up with a bazooka, chasing him down with a car, running him over, setting him on fire, kissing another man, and getting paid to do it. And this is why we have such an amazing marriage, is because that was the ultimate marriage therapy for us. And now he's in the Army. So, we talk about like higher risk tolerance. And people are like, oh, he's definitely the one with the higher risk tolerance. And it's like, I own a company, but, he's writing a blank check payable with his life. So I have mad respect for what he does, and everybody that serves. But it also goes back to, if I wasn't in a military family, Grant, like what would my values be? And so values are so important to me because I was raised by somebody who is, a multi-generational Army veteran. And now I'm married to, he married into an Army family. We converted him, and so he joined the Army. I couldn't do the Army because of my heart condition, but it's, I would have probably figured something out in the Army, Grant, in order to get some kind of a side hustle. Who knows what I would have done. But this is how I make a difference in the world. And so this makes me very happy. And it is work. I'm not going to say like, that whole quote of, do something that you love and you'll never work a day in your life. It is work, but behind my self-care and behind my family, this is what I love to do.
It's very refreshing to me to talk to anyone who's figured out what is important to them and then figured out how to make a living doing it every day. And when you're able to figure out what those things are and then align them, there's just some glow you have to you. It just makes it easy to go to. I mean, you called it work, but it's probably enjoyable work because you get so much fulfillment out of it doing
I
what
do.
your personal purpose is. So
I
tell us
do.
about what the consulting group looks like now. You mentioned that you're helping organizations now as opposed to individuals in a therapy setting. Give us the 30,000 foot view of the consulting firm.
Kind of, sort of. So the most lucrative part of the consulting business is in corporations. So we have a corporate team. And that's not where my values are. I love helping people like my parents and my grandparents. And so we have this, like I say, we have this big giant forward facing part of the company that goes into corporations, and that's really what keeps the light on. And my team is just amazing at that, and I really just honor and love them and adore them for being able to do that, and they're very passionate about it, and they have experience in that corporate environment. I took a step back and said, I love speaking, i.e. podcasting, and I love helping family-centric small business owners spend more time with their families and have more mental health. And so I work in the division of our company that does small business coaching and small business ownership. And we have group coaching, and then I create courses catered to that. I'll come in and create courses for corporate because there's humans inside corporate, and that's passionate to me. However, in 2016, I was having my second baby in 2017. 2016, I was on a plane 32 weeks out of the year. And so that hotel lifestyle that came with corporate consulting at that time wasn't really for me. The speaking I love doing, and I don't mind traveling for that. But you talk about energy. I was depleted by the time I came home from corporate consulting, where I go on stage for 45 minutes or for, 30 minutes and inspire, for an all team meeting and give them motivation and give them hope and share my story. And I'll come home and just lit up like a light bulb and have all this energy for my family. So that's what the company structure looks like now. And that's okay as a business owner to not do the most high ticket item in the company. Do what you love and do what you're good at. And we joke all the time because I build these giant, build these giant companies. And then after 2 years, I either sell them or cannibalize them into something else because I like helping people succeed. And once I've built the machine, other people can run the machine. And so now with my, after my car accident, I'm helping other people build the machine, and I've stopped, for the moment, I've stopped opening companies and building my own companies, and I'm just helping other people build their companies. And then also it's come up a lot where my story is powerful for others to hear. And so that's where I started saying, okay, then I'll do coaching or I'll do speaking, and wrote the books because it was I have this finite amount of time that I can spend with you and create one podcast, one piece of content. And then it goes out to hundreds of thousands of people to help make an impact. And then that's what lights me up. And so that's how we built A Better Place Consulting. And then the other organizations were built around from almost an investment structure. There's not a lot of women that own technology companies. So I was the lead investor and have the majority ownership in a piece of technology because that was important to me and my value system to see more women in technology. That being said, I know nothing about code. And so I have to have a team that I can trust. And then I talked to you about the equity company. And then we also have an online entrepreneurial platform that is that recurring revenue membership. And so just building off of where the value is, don't start 50 companies. I found that every time I try to not have, and I have a nonprofit for service animals and teach companies about how to interact with service animals. But I found that my family will joke with me about, I guess there's a kids movie that has robots and the robot says, find a need, fill a need. And my family will joke with me that I find a need and start a company. And now I don't start the companies anymore. I just find somebody who has the company and invest in them.
Well, that's a great way to line everything up personally, money and values and all of the above. If someone out there listening to this feels like they need that kind of support in their organization, where can they find you?
abetterplaceconsulting.com or bunnyyoung.com. If you want a ton of free resources and free content, we have that on abetterplaceconsulting.com, as well as we have a YouTube channel called the Power of Purpose channel that has hundreds of hours of content aimed at helping you make an impact and an income, whether you're in a corporation or whether you are a solopreneur. And so, and then as far as connecting with me, I love playing on Instagram because I have horses and my Great Dane service dog and really entertaining kids that I just took them to an Eagles concert and they were dancing up and down like in the back. And I was laughing that they were more entertaining to me than Joe Walsh. I would have paid to see them. So that's the kind of thing that is on Instagram because I like to remind myself of not just chasing the next thing, but actually enjoying this moment. I worked really hard to be in this moment. And so I'm choosing to be in this moment.
I think that's a great way to wrap it up, Bunny. Thank you for coming on and sharing all this with us today. Your story and a little bit of wisdom about how to manage burnout and PTSD and all these things that so many people are going through right now. But thank you for being an advocate for small businesses too. It's more resources are needed, I think, in that sphere, and people like you are doing the right thing. So I appreciate your time. Thanks again.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure and honor. Thank you. And I hope it made a difference.
Oh, I'm sure it did to a few people out there.
Thanks for tuning in to Grow Money Business, the podcast dedicated to helping business owners grow both their wealth and business on their own terms. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you digest podcasts to ensure you don't miss out on future episodes and announcements. And feel free to submit questions to growmoneybusiness.com.